So we went to the first seating, and it was essentially us and David Draymond and his parents.
Oh, wow.
So, and I said to Tzippy, this is going back 25 years ago or something like that. I said to Tzippy, that's David Draymond. And our kids were huge David Draymond fans at the time. Well, it couldn't be 20, it was 20 years ago. Let's say 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so she said, you've got to go over and get his autograph for the kids. So I said, I'm not getting his autograph. He's eating with his parents. I'm not going over to somebody who's having dinner with his parents.
Well, now you see.
Who was it, Rabbi? Who are you talking about?
David
Draymond, the thing I just said.
Yeah, so she's like, you're a wimp. Your kids love him. Go over there and get his autograph. So I'm not going over. So then one of the waitresses went over and asked him for his autograph, and he got upset at her, visibly upset. He said, I'm eating dinner with my parents. Please leave me alone. Wow. It's not the right time. So
good call, Rabbi.
No, so my wife did not think it was a good call. Like 5 minutes goes, so go over and get his autograph. So, and I said, did you not just see what happened over there? She said, this is for your children. You can't be, like afraid of somebody's reaction when you're doing something for your children. And then we had to have a long discussion with our waiter about whether it would be appropriate to go to ask him. That's how our Thanksgiving dinner went that year.
I see.
At Shallot's. But thankfully, I did not go over. And
Who was the person?
He's like a heavy metal rock, a very heavy metal rock star. But he grew up in like either West Rogers Park or Peterson Park. He went to Ari Crown Day School. He went to several different high schools. I think he was kicked out of at least 4 of them.
Yes.
And my father happened to teach him when he was at Wits.
See, that was your in.
Yeah, but there was no in.
No.
That was not an in.
That was not the place.
Right, but for Yeshiva Bachrim, he became like a hero because he was absolutely famous. I mean, there's videos of him doing these concerts outside with tens of thousands of people, and everybody's like shouting and whatever.
And until yesterday, I had never heard of him.
I was actually at a Packer game with my father, and they play, how they play snippets of songs to get the crowd riled up?
Right. So
they played a snippet of one of his songs to get the crowd riled up. And we're in Green Bay, Wisconsin, at a Packer game. And I said to my father, did you just hear that music? And he goes, yeah. I said, that was your student. And his early persona, he used to have these like jewelry, like under his lip that it was like silver, and it would come down and sort of like over his chin. And he used to be wheeled out like Hannibal Lecter. He would come wheeled out in a straight jacket and like a mask over his face and get wheeled out. That's how he would first come out on stage. Right. And a lot of his stuff. But even in his earliest songs, there'd be like a Hebrew word thrown in. Like there's one song where there's this word tifached, be afraid. But it's in Hebrew. Like he would throw in like some Hebrew lyrics. The Yeshiva Bachrim loved him, and the yeshivas. Sorry, Linda. So Yeshiva Bachrim, and he told story. He would tell stories about how he'd be at a wedding or something, and people would come up to him with their benchers. You know how at a wedding they give out those benchers with like the chassan and kala's name on it? And he'd go, I'm not autographing a bencher. Anyways, so he has this mystique that even, like very serious yeshiva bachrim
But
are fans of his.
he has a good heart. I mean, what he did
yeah.
for that little girl,
Yeah,
it was just so sweet.
right.
Oh, by the way, thanks for the Bulls win.
I had a great time with David. I would have had a great time no matter what happened.
I know.
But it was
But you did.
quite an experience to
I
be at
blame
that
the
Bulls game
win
last
that
night.
you were there.
I don't
Oh, you
think
were
so.
there
The
last night.
Pelican. I went with David Bojan.
Oh,
Every couple of years, David Bojan takes me to a Bulls game. And so last night was this was a weird week. I have a young cousin who's in his 20s, a young cousin who lives in Milwaukee, and he went to Marquette. And I also went to graduate school at Marquette. And so we always had this connection. And so every year or two while he was a student, we tried to do it every year. While he was a student, we would go to a Marquette Warriors game, like a college basketball game. So now he's graduated and he's working, but he happens to live walking distance to the Forum, Pfizer Forum, where the Marquette and the Bucks play. And so, and now he has season tickets to these games. So I went up. So on Sunday, I was at a college basketball game, and that Wednesday, I was at the Bulls game. And I haven't been to a basketball game for several years, but for some reason, 2 times in 1 week, I was at basketball games. It happens that last night's game went to double overtime.
I know.
And made everybody very happy. For most of the game, it was a kind of sleepy game for both teams, but they all picked it up at the last minute there. Anyways, I had a wonderful time with David. I did get a kosher pastrami dog from Morty's.
Is that what it is?
Kosher stand, Morty Siegel.
Yeah, I know they've
It's
had
called Morty's now, Morty's Kosher, whatever. So I made sure to be a patron of the kosher food there.
Gotta support those.
It does. There is something for years of having, for most of my life, gone to baseball, basketball, and football games where you can't eat the food.
Right.
There is something about being able to eat the food there, no matter how pedestrian the food happens to be. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. The fact that it's there is wonderful.
Yes. So I had the full experience.
I'm glad you had a good time.
Yes, and he has really remarkable seats, and so one of the takeaways from his seats was that you're so close to the players, and he's right near the Bucks bench. He's like, there's only 2 rows in front of him. You're sitting on card table chairs, on folding chairs, and there's 2 rows in front of him, and then it's the Bulls bench. So you're actually right next to the players. And I mentioned to him that they just seem like kids, they seem like people. They're people. They're just, it's like when you meet an Israeli soldier. When you actually meet an Israeli soldier and you see they're just kids and they're human. Like when you read about them, there's some distance, but when you actually see them, and when you see these guys, you see they're human beings experiencing
superhuman moments.
Well, but when they're interacting and everything, it's human moments.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's all being
on the bench
recorded.
and talking to each
Everything's being recorded. Everything's, potentially a highlight. And so they know that too. And they're certainly at certain times projecting towards that. But it was nice just to see them as human beings having a human moment. Okay.
guys, around 10:30, I'm going to be gone for a couple of minutes. I have to set up a Zoom meeting for David, and then I'll come back, hopefully, if you're still here. Okay, bye-bye.
All right. All right, so we are towards the end of Shlach. We've had our tourists/spies. We've had the fallout from their report. We've now had the record of their death and the response of the people to their death, which is mourning. And then we are now ready for chapter 14, verse 40. So we're in Bamidbar in Numbers, chapter 14, verse 40.
I can try and read it. My left eye blurs every once in a while, so if I miss a few words.
If you say something blurry, we'll call you
Yes.
out.
Or I can read it if you want. I don't want you to strain your
Okay.
mind.
Yeah, okay.
Go
All
for
right.
it, Lynn.
I've got to cancel it. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, 40. Early next morning, is that right? They set
Yeah.
out toward the crest of the hill country, saying, "We are prepared to go up to the place that the Lord has spoken of, for we were wrong." But Moses said, "Why do you transgress the Lord's command? This will not succeed. Do not go up, lest you be routed by your enemies, for the Lord is not in your midst. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there to face you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned from following the Lord, and the Lord will not be with you." Yet defiantly they marched toward the crest of the hill country, though neither the Lord's ark of the covenant nor Moses stirred from the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that hill country came down and dealt with them, a shattering blow to Hormah.
Okay. All right. So these are often referred to as the ma'apilim, Ayin Pei, Lamed is in verse 14. It says viapilu. It's a new word.
Where is that?
44.
Okay.
So Rashi says it means they like strengthen themselves, something like that. How did you have the translation for that word, the first word in 44?
I think it was defiantly.
They were defiant.
Right.
Okay.
Yet defiantly. The Yafilu.
Right. So
And-
they're called the Mapilim, which would mean the defiant ones. Again, in Rashi, engrais or something in Old French. It means chutzpah. It means like chutzpah. So according to Rashi, and there is another mention of this word in the second chapter of Habakkuk. And I point that out because we just finished the book of Habakkuk, which is only 3 chapters at Nach and Nash and Mizrahi Grill at 12:30 on Wednesdays, which you're all invited to come to. Okay, so this is a kind of story. Even if you went to day school or high school, you might not remember this story. It's just very brief moment, and it's like this epitaph for the rebels of the tourists. They appear to be people that are looking to demonstrate their willingness to follow God and to follow Moshe. But when Moshe confronts them and tells them this is not what God wants, they stubbornly go forward. So this is, at first glance, they appear to be brave. They appear to be contrite. But the fact that Moshe confronts them and tells them this isn't what God wants, that God will not be in your midst, and there's no way you can succeed without God in our midst, and they continue to go forward, seems to be the lesson. In other words, they haven't learned the lesson. They haven't learned the lesson. And whether it's stubbornness in one direction or the other, either stubbornness in fear or stubbornness in courage, that stubbornness, if it is in the face of God's wishes, leads to the same end. Which allows us to reflect back on the report of the tribes. So because this would seem to confirm the testimony of the spies. The spies are telling the people, we cannot beat them. They're too powerful. They're too big. We cannot beat them. This seems to support their assertion. But if you look back at Kalev's statement to them and Yoshua's statements to them, they were saying that with God's help, we can beat them. So this is the element that seems to be missing.
God's help.
Right. There was, that joke that there was some Israeli general who said that if you believe that in a miraculous victory, you're being pragmatic. In Israel, to believe in miraculous victories, that's a pragmatist. If somebody would tell you that Israel could win without God's help, that would be a miracle. Because you're looking at, and this is, again, something that has happened throughout history, but it's certainly an experience we're having now, that we can't figure out how this can be resolved. We're looking at a scenario, we can't figure out how it's going to be resolved. It doesn't look like there's a path to a long time victory and secure borders and peace with our neighbors. It just doesn't even look possible. So somebody would say that's exactly how it's always looked. In other words, that is the view that the 10 spies were telling the people. And this seems to be Moshe's opinion too. If God's not with you, you aren't going to succeed. So, so this, although it seems like just a little moment attached to the previous story, you could say that it colors the story and gives it more definition and sort of underlines the main points. But they are called the Ma'apilim, and it's also interesting that Amalek is here. The fact that Amalek is here, because those people who are always looking for Amalek, every time Amalek shows up, assume that there's something deeper going on. So let's see if there's any drop of something in that bottle. There is. Leftovers. The Talmud, when it comes to the main characters, or at least three of the main characters of the Megillah, the Talmud asks, for instance, where do we find Esther in the Torah? Where do we find Mordechai in the Torah? And they mean the 5 books. And one of the they ask, where do we find Haman in the Torah? And obviously they're not in the 5 books. It happened many years after the 5 books. It happened during the end of what began as the Babylonian exile, and now then was the Persian exile. But the assumption is that figures of this import, and especially because they play an important part in the Purim story, that they must be hinted to in the Torah. Everything is hinted in the Torah, and certainly
In one way or
this
another.
thing, and especially it's a salvation story. So, so that the Talmud says it's hinted to in the verse, Hamin ha'etz hazeh asher tzivisicha lo tochal mimenu achalta. Did you eat from that tree I told you not to eat from? And this is because God is, his voice is coming through the garden, and he asks Adam, where are you? And Adam says, I'm hiding in the bushes because I'm naked. And then Hashem says to him, did you eat from that tree I told you not to eat from? So that's Haman. That's what the Torah is saying. Haman is there. So when some of the commentaries are explaining what that's all about, they suggest what it means is that Amalek, Haman represents Amalek, and Amalek is an enforcer of the relationship between the Jewish people and God. If there is a breach of trust between God and the Jewish people, that breach of trust could fester, and it could harden, and then be very hard to overcome. So there's different options. There could be calls to repent. There could be, there could be all sorts of different ways that are being used by God or built into the system that are meant to ensure that this gulf between God and the Jewish people doesn't harden to the point where you can't overcome it. So one of them is Amalek. Amalek's role is to attack when there is a gulf between the Jewish people and God, which could harden. So Amalek comes, they attack the people, and then the response to Amalek brings the people back to God. So there's another place in the Talmud where I forgot who is speaking to who, but one of them says that Mashiach will come when all the Jewish people are righteous. So the other one, it might have been Rabbi Yoshua. The other one, these are figures, I'm pretty sure, from the time of the Mishnah. The other one said a Mashiach could come even if everybody is wicked. So the Gemara says, what do you like, how would that work? So they say that if everybody's wicked, then God will bring a king as hard as Haman. And he will threaten to destroy the people. And then the people will be called or inspired to return. And then Mashiach will come. So Mashiach will either come because the people do it on their own, or it'll come because the people, there is no choice. They sort of
slapped
inspired.
upside the head and they decided to behave. Right.
So wherever you're looking, like for instance, when Amalek first attacks, it says that the people were at Rephidim. So there's a midrash, Rashi quotes it, Rafu Yedehem min Torah. They loosened their grip on the Torah. The people loosened their grip on the Torah, which meant they are moving more distant from God. And then boom, Amalek is in. That's where Amalek, so it might attract Amalek in the first place, but that's sort of their role. Their role is a kind of enforcer of the relationship between the Jewish people and God. So therefore they're always looking for where Amalek shows up, because when Amalek shows up, there's something, the assumption is there's something like that going on. Now, you may not have thought there would still be something going on, because the punishment has already been declared. The spies have been killed. The people are apparently humbled and contrite, you would think it's over. But now, when these people go up, Amalek is there. That's another indication. This would be like if you looked at a painting, and you're, it's a there's some kind of landscape, but you look and there's trees, and if you look carefully next to a tree, there's like death. But you have to look really careful, and you notice the artist put a little symbol in there. And now you're looking back at the painting, trying to figure out what's going on. Why is death next to that tree? And then you're like, so here it's sort of like that. This is another indication that they're still not healthy. They're still not healthy. And they aren't humbled and contrite yet, because these people, although on the surface they look like they're trying to repair what went wrong, they're really continuing what went wrong, and they're doubling down on what went wrong in a certain way. And now Amalek's coming in. First it was God with killing off the 10 spies. Right. Now they're still going at it, and now Amalek shows up. And it appears that was enough to send the message, and that this kind of thing is not going to happen anymore. But we're going to get to Korach and stuff, and we're going to see there's still stuff going on. It's hard to know what the timeline is of all of this, how quickly Korach is going to come after the episode of the spies. But Korach, what we're eventually going to read in Korach, we're not there yet, but what we're eventually going to read in Korach can't be understood in a vacuum. So the question would be, is it still an indication of whatever was going wrong with the spies? Are there still flare-ups? And that'll be something that we visit about that. Okay, now we're going to start with chapter 15. This is going to be very sacrificial. We're still going to pay attention to all the details. But we're going to read from the beginning of chapter 15 through verse 16. So we're going to read 15:1 through 16. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I'm giving you to settle in, and would present a gift to the Lord from the herd or from the flock, be it burnt offering or sacrifice in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered, or as a free will offering, or at your fixed occasions, producing an odor pleasing to the Lord. The person who presents a gift to the Lord shall bring as a grain offering 1/10 of a measure of choice flour with 1/4 of a hin of oil mixed in. You shall also offer with the burnt offering or the sacrifice 1/4 of a hin of wine as a libation for each sheep. In the case of a ram, you shall present as a grain offering 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with 1/3 of hin of oil mixed in and 1/3 of hin of wine as a libation, as an offering of pleasing odor to the Lord. And if it is an animal from the herd that you offer to the Lord as a burnt offering or as a sacrifice in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered, or as an offering of well-being, there shall be an offering of grain offering along with the animal, 3/10 of a measure of choice flour with 1/2 a hin of oil mixed in, and as a libation you shall offer 1/2 a hin of wine, these being gifts of pleasing odor to the Lord. Thus shall be done with each ox, with each ram, and with each sheep or goat. As many as you offer, you shall do thus with each one, as many as there are. Every citizen, when presenting a gift of pleasing odor to the Lord, shall do so with them. And when throughout the ages a stranger who has taken up residence with you, or one who lives among you, would present a gift of pleasing odor to the Lord, as you do, so shall it be done by the rest of the congregation. Thou shalt be one law for you and for the resident stranger. It shall be a law for all time throughout the ages. You and the stranger shall be alike before the Lord. The same ritual and the same rule shall apply to you and to the stranger who resides among you.
Okay. Right. So first, just to some of the details. So when we think of offerings, we tend to think of animals as offerings, which would be from cattle, sheep, or goats. But they aren't the only ingredients for offerings. There can be other offerings, and we saw this in the beginning of Vayikra, at the beginning of Leviticus, where it went through each one. But besides cattle, sheep, or goats, and in the sheep category, there's rams and ewes. There's also birds, which are either the turtle dove or the dove. Turtle dove or dove. It's interesting. When I was on the pastor's trips, there was a lot of I noticed, listening into conversations between the pastors, they would often mention the sparrow. And I wasn't sure why. Why are they mentioning the sparrow? And then it dawned on me that they use the word sparrow as a translation for tzipor. Tzipor. So tzipor in Hebrew means bird, but you could see, and it's very possible that the word sparrow is derived of tzipor. So it seems like in many Christian translations, they translate the word tzipor always to be sparrow, and it took on significance because of probably something in what they call the New Testament, some quotes or something. But it would have been tzipor. That would have been the original. But you can see in the Torah, sometimes the word tzipor is used with regard to the offerings, the korbanos, the offerings. And there it means either a dove or a turtle dove. So when I've looked it up, in dictionaries, biblical dictionaries, it seems like their understanding is it means a small bird. And so it's a general word for small birds. Amongst the small birds are doves and turtle doves. So they are also a possibility for offerings. And then there's grain offerings. Grain offerings are almost always wheat, and they're almost always in the form of fine flour mixed with oil and with some frankincense on the top. I was pointing out to this gentleman who I study with, his name is Don Scott, who used to be a pastor years ago, that when you go to Christian gift stores in Israel, I mean, they're Israeli gift stores, but they're targeting Christian tourists, there's always frankincense and myrrh. Like frankincense and myrrh is an impulse buy. That's near the cash register, instead of whatever.
Chewing gum.
Yeah, chewing gum. So you have frankincense and myrrh. You never see frankincense and myrrh at one targeting Jewish tourists. Jewish tourists are just not interested in frankincense for some reason. But frankincense, levona, is all over the the korbanos, and you would think it would be interesting to people to see what it's like. I believe it's a sap, a hardened sap. And it gives a fragrant aroma. And so on the mincha, you always have fine flour together with some oil that is a certain amount of oil that's poured in, and then there's some frankincense. And then what happens is there's like a bowl with the fine flour and the oil and the frankincense, and the Kohen takes a scoop out of it, and that scoop is going to include flour, oil, and the frankincense, and then that gets burnt on the altar. He like flicks it into the fire on the altar, representing the grain offering, and then the rest of the stuff is eaten by the Kohanim. And they can make like a laffa out of it. They could make pancakes out of it. They could even make something. There's a description that sounds more like a bagel. It's first boiled and then baked. Yeah. So that's a grain offering. And then there's also liquids. The two liquids are oil and wine. So and they are identified here. So if you're bringing an offering that may start with a calf, and most of the focus is on the calf, this portion is just telling you there's also typically, together with the calf offering, there's also a grain portion that has the oil mixed in with the frankincense, and then oftentimes there's wine that is poured. This would be what might be called sacramental wine. Sacramental wine. So there's wine that's poured on the altar. Now, the way the wine was poured on the altar was there were these holes at the corner of the altar that it was hollow all the way down. It was even hollow beneath the floor of the courtyard. There was like a hollow center underneath the altar. And so there was this hollow, a hole at the corner on top of the altar. And if you poured something down that, it would just go down into this chasm below. So they have like something on top that would be like, maybe like look like a vase, and you'd pour the wine into that, and then it would go down. All the way down to the ground. Right. So that is the wine offering. Those are the only two liquids, except on Sukkot. On Sukkot, we have an oral.
Wine wasn't for drinking in any way, shape, or form.
No, it was poured down there, and that word nesech, that's in verse 5. How do you have in verse 5? How do you have the word nesech? The second is, so it's wine. Is it for pouring? How do they describe it? Wine for.
It says libation. Yeah,
they just say the word libation. Sounds very sacramental, but it means like you're pouring it. So that term, yayin nesech, is the term that is typically used, colloquially used, even today, about wine that is not kosher. Non-kosher wine is often called by like a Jew in the community, they might say they might use the term yayin nesech, or they will use the words stam yenom, which means they're plain wine. They're plain wine. So there is a prohibition from the Torah to use wine that was a sacrament to idolatry. So this was an element of idol worship as well, to pour wine as part of, they may drink it too, but they pour wine, they dedicate the wine in some way to the idol. They use it in part of the service of the idol. So the specific term for somebody actually doing that to an idol is called yayin nesech, a libation to the idol. That is very seriously forbidden. That's a very high form of idolatry, very seriously forbidden. So, but then at some point, the Sanhedrin added a feature to that law. And the feature to that law was even wine that was not used as a sacrament, if it was touched or poured by Gentiles, even if it was not meant for an offering, if it was poured by Gentiles, it is forbidden for a Jew to drink it. That is a rabbinic law. It was an anti-assimilation law to keep Jews from drinking together in such a way that could lead to marrying their children off to each other. So, so this term, yain nesech, is one of these terms you'll see even to this day in conversations about kosher wine. What wine is kosher? So, for instance, even though that wine was supervised, if you have, let's say, orange juice, and the orange juice, it was made sure that this product is 100% orange juice. So, and it'll have a little supervision indication on it, which means the process was supervised. You can drink that orange juice. Grape juice should be the same thing. Wine should be the same thing. They're completely kosher original ingredients, and they could even be supervised, but that would not be enough. If the person pouring it is not Jewish, then it is not kosher. And that is, again, a rabbinic anti-assimilation law. That's technically called stam yaina. They're plain wine. But it was kind of attached to the original law of yain nesech. One of the ways you see that they attached it to the original law of sacramental wine is that with sacramental wine, in other words, if you see a bottle of wine and somebody tells you it was boiled, you're allowed to drink it. Not a problem on a biblical level. Why? Because no self-respecting idolater is going to use boiled wine for their sacrament.
Right.
So if you see that this wine was boiled, you know it was never used for the sacrament. So it's an exception. You know, if you were around idolaters, you wouldn't use any bottle of wine because you don't know what they dedicated and what they didn't dedicate. So, but if you saw a bottle of boiled wine, what we call mavushal, cooked or boiled wine, so then you could be certain they never used it for sacramental stuff because they would never use boiled wine for sacramental stuff. That got added to this rule too. So even though the whole point about wine, regular wine, is that it shouldn't be a vehicle for assimilation, and it shouldn't make a difference if the wine was boiled or not as far as assimilation goes. It has the same effect either way. But it gets like grandfathered into this law too, and therefore, if you have yain mavushal, cooked wine, it doesn't matter that a Gentile poured it or had it, as long as it has a hechsher on it, it's okay. That the processing was good. So that's how you see that that law was somehow attached to the previous law, because otherwise, why would that exception apply?
Right.
Okay, anyways, that's maybe too much about wine.
Too much about wine.
So, and then we have sort of measurements for if you have a ram, if you have cattle, lambs or ewes or goats, and it just has measures for each one. But then starting in 13, there's lots of emphasis on the fact that citizens of Israel and resident aliens, in this case, it seems that when they refer to converts, They're not, in other words, they use the word ger. They're not talking about a convert in the sense that we speak of converts. They don't mean ger in the sense that we mean ger. They mean ger in the sense of resident alien. Do you have any comments on that in your various commentaries? Starting in 13, 14, anywhere over there, do they talk about who this person is?
Yeah, I have something. One who lives among you, literally one who is among you, perhaps the foreigners, and then it has no Greek, who visits or sojourns, but does not actually reside among the Israelites, as does the stranger. Both may offer sacrifices, provided these regulations are followed.
Right. So there is a status. There is a status which is called resident alien. And this status has consequences. So, for instance, there is a prohibition against selling land in Israel to idolaters. You're not, the prohibition originally shows itself with regard to the 7 nations, that you're not allowed to sell land to a member of the 7 nations in the land of Israel. But most of the early commentaries believe that that is extended to all idolaters. In fact, there's hardly anybody, there may not be anybody from the early commentaries who thinks that that is limited just to the 7 nations. It seems to be broadly accepted that it applies to idolaters. So you're not allowed to sell property to idolaters. There is some conversation about whether you're allowed to sell it to any Gentile. In fact, there are some weighty later commentaries who say that this prohibition was intended for any Gentiles, with one exception: resident aliens, what's called ger toshav. It seems like everybody agrees ger toshav is an exception. So you have the following possibilities. This prohibition against selling land in Israel might only apply to the 7 nations, because that's where it was written. There doesn't seem to be many who think that. Then there's a broader category. Anybody who would be classified as an idolater would not be able to buy land in Israel. And then there's the broadest application, that would be any Gentile is not allowed to buy land in the land of Israel. Even those people acknowledge that even if it meant that Gentiles cannot, one exception would be ger toshav, which is the resident alien. So there is one benefit that you have to being a resident alien, that you're allowed to own land in Israel. What is the qualification to be a resident alien? You have to accept, there is some discussion about it. Most people, when they speak about it, just say, this person has accepted the 7 Noahide laws as understood by Judaism. So they believe in the same one God that the Jews believe in. They believe idolatry is wrong, just like the Jews believe in it. And they have several other things. They have to set up courts. The incest is forbidden, like a certain basic, what we call the Noahide laws. So if they accept the Noahide laws, then they can qualify as resident aliens and even own property in Israel. Now, they can bring offerings. So that could be what they're talking about here. That does not sound like what Linda's commentary is suggesting, the note. There, it seems to be talking even about traveling strangers, what we would call just Gentiles, traveling strangers. Now, they also are allowed to bring offerings. In fact, you do not have to have property in Israel to be, you don't have to be a citizen of Israel, or property in Israel, a resident alien of Israel to bring offerings in the temple. You could be a Gentile. You could even be an idolater. And you could have an offering brought on your behalf. In other words, you'd bring it to the Kohen, and he would bring the offering on your behalf. In fact, there are records of, like Darius the Mede, amongst them, of kings and others who sent animals to be offerings at the Beit HaMikdash. And that was a potential, I don't know what percentage of the work that happened in the Beit HaMikdash represented that potential, but that seems to be Linda's from the Eitz Chaim, that seems to be from that note.
In here it says, although Gentiles may bring peace offerings to the temple, only Jews, natives, bring the libations.
Okay, so that would be a distinction between these approaches.
Right.
If we're talking about actual resident alien, so it said only Jews, comma, how did it say it?
It says only Jews dash natives dash bring the libations.
So are they, so it sounds like they're distinguishing even from what we would call resident aliens.
Right.
Right, even resident
It sounds
aliens do
like
not bring
those
libations.
Jews native to
Right,
Israel is what it sounds like.
okay. All right, that obviously requires more investigation. You would think I would know all about this, since I did study this tractate a couple times. I did do it in my later years, so the likelihood of remembering details is much reduced, but it is my responsibility to try to get that. Anyway, so that's the stuff about ger. Hin, the word hin is a measure for liquids. Do either of you have anything about the hin? I was given a chart by somebody for the purpose of translating weights and measures. And then I proceeded to put it somewhere where I don't know where it is. Oh, but I have something called the internet. Not all of you have this. I could just look it up, couldn't I? All right, hin. Biblical.
See where it mentions it at all.
Biblical measure. So the hin works out to slightly more than 6 liters, 1.6 US gallons, or 12 logs. 12 logs is one hin is 12 logs. We said before a log is probably a pint. So is that consistent? Anyways, 1.6 US gallons works out to be.
It's a lot.
Yeah. But again, they're pouring it down. They're not mixing it into the
Right.
flour. They're pouring it down as a libation. And bringing wine to the Beit HaMikdash was a regular feature of the towns in Yehuda and the Shomron. In fact, I have a friend who lives in a yishuv that's called Neve Tzuf, and it's in the Shomron, not terribly far from Modi'in and Kiryat Sefer and those areas. Not
You
terribly
know
far
where
from
that
Modi'in.
is.
Right, you do. So your son, I'm sure, knows people on the Neve Tzuf. It's not right there, but it's like a 15, 20-minute drive. Because I know I met them for dinner at the mall in Modi'in.
Love that mall.
Yeah, it's a very good mall. Azrieli or something it's called. I got that jacket over there. I got it in that mall.
Hey.
There you go. Anyways, so they uncovered an ancient wine, like a production area. They found dug into stone where they would have stomped on the grapes, and then there was like a little channel where the liquid would go. This is all outside.
Yeah.
So they would stomp on it in a certain place. then there was like a channel, clearly, you could see it clearly, a channel that would, where the grape juice would go, and then it goes to another area, and they had somebody come out to date it, and it would have existed in temple times. And they had, I don't know what their indication was, maybe they found a mikvah nearby or something right near it. So the belief was that this area, the town in this area where they've built this new yishuv, was produced wine for the Beit HaMikdash. Because I think there was proximity to mikvahs or something also. The problem is that if you want to get a real archaeological team, there's so many things to see in Israel. You have to like wait online for years, unless you have the money to pay for an archaeological team to come, which is a fortune. Otherwise, you have to wait for years for Israel's archaeological people to get. They'll come and look at it, give you some general something about it, but they're not really going to do a real dig
unless they're overly impressed.
Right. I was at a town where they were overly impressed because they found there's this town called Migdal on the northwestern part of the Kinneret. They were impressed because they found this stone which had a relief of the Beit HaMikdash on it, what they believed to be a relief, and then they got very excited. And these there was a Christian group that was trying to build a hotel there. The Christian group got excited about it, and then they paid, really, I think the Catholic Church paid for the excavation. And but the Israeli archaeologists were involved, and it was but they were very excited. And there they excavated the whole city. You can see the roads, you can see the shuls, you can see the mikvahs, you can see where they kept fish and where they salted fish and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so if you find something extraordinary. But anyway, so the preparation for wine that had to be kept pure, so hence mikvahs and all those other kinds of things, was going on in villages and towns all around Jerusalem for this purpose. Okay, we are going to get into
Baking bread.
a little bit more. Making bread.
Right.
And
Linda had to leave, I guess, so.
Okay. So we're and then eventually we're going to get to tzitzis, but we have some sacrificial stuff. So we had sacrificial stuff in Vayikra. Then we had what appeared to be sacrificial stuff at the beginning of Bamidbar, at least maybe not sacrificial, but stuff that had to do with the Mishkan. Then we got into a narrative chunk. Then we are back to sacrificial stuff. Then we're going to have the mitzvah of tzitzis, and then we're going to go into the Korach story. Okay, I am grateful.
Rabbi, can I quickly ask you a question? Because what we've been studying in the Rambam about, this is a question about the Ger Toshav, I guess. It just reminded me the kinds of things we have to do that Israel subjugates the people that are there. They can't. It reminded me of the dhimmi, very, very much of the dhimmi.
Think about this. The African, there was an African immigration to Israel. It was happening through the Sinai into the Negev. At one point, there were thousands, and there still are thousands of African human beings from like the area of Ethiopia, like Tanzania and Sudan, and those kind of area, just pouring into Israel. Now a big part of this was because there are Bedouin kidnappers that buy these people who were kidnapped in their own countries, and then ransom them to their family all around the world. And when they free them, they would free them into Israel. So there started to be this like a trickle, but then a larger numbers. And now Israel is panicking because Israel has a grand total of like 10 million citizens. And there was a potential that millions of people are going to start trying to come into Israel in order to, what they had their illegal immigration problem.
Right.
And they were concerned was going to overwhelm the country. And so now you have tens of thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands, you have many thousands of people in limbo living around Tel Aviv and various areas that are African sort of illegals. They don't have Israeli citizenship, and they're in a kind of limbo. There's like all these different scenarios where you have human beings that, you understand their motivation and their desire. They don't have ill will, and they end up in situations that they are basically subjected to indignity and can't realize citizenry and things like that go on. On the other hand, nobody has an obvious solution to the problem. It's like the same thing, what's going on with the immigration problem coming in from other countries. I just read about the fact that there are Africans trying to get out of mainly Western Africa that have now, last year, 70,000 came into the United States. It's now a new vehicle. So you're not just even talking about people from Honduras. You're talking about people that are now figuring out a way to come from all parts of the world, and who wouldn't want to give them the opportunity for freedom and safety and all that kind of stuff. It's just like some of these problems are
Not easily
I agree.
solved.
I agree. It's not supposed to be in perpetuity that the person, obviously, it doesn't have to be that the person in perpetuity is subject, not as a full citizen.
Right.
Like with the Ger Toshav, they could become a full Ger if they want to, and then they would be a regular citizen, or at least almost entirely a full citizen of Israel if they did full conversion. But yeah, I know.
Okay, yeah, I know, it's,
Yeah.
Either way, speaking of that, I heard that right now there are more people moving in the world, moving around, immigrate, whatever, than probably ever before in the history of the world, maybe.
Do they have a number? What they think?
I didn't hear a number, but it's in so many places, so many different places.
Nobody wants to stay where they are.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi. David just walked in. Guess what, David?
Okay.
What?
Rabbi Wolf was at the game last night, and it went into double overtime.
Rabbi Wolf?
I mean, Rabbi Karsh.
You were there?
Yeah, with David Bojam. Did you ever meet David Bojam?
He hasn't watched it yet. He taped it.
I would tell you, Lamar DeRozan, at one point I looked up and it said he had 32 points. And I turned to David Bojam and I go, is there anything that makes you believe that man could have 32 points? Because for 3.5 quarters, or maybe for sure 3 quarters, he didn't look like he hardly did anything. And then right when it mattered, it was like they woke up. He hit 3 free throws in a row at a time when that would have been the game if he didn't. And so I don't know what his final scoring was.
35.
Right, and those last 3 were, I think, those free throws.
Wow.
Or maybe, I don't know if he scored it in the second overtime. But they looked sort of sleepy, but the Cavs also looked sort of sleepy. The Cavs, for much of the game, who was incredible was who played.
Oh, Drummond.
Yeah, that first half, he had 18 rebounds in the first half.
I know.
And he is, by the way, these seats were so close, and the other guys are tall. He is a giant.
I know.
He looked so much bigger. There were some people that were taller. Mobley is taller than him. There were certain people on the court that looked taller than him, but no, he looked like Goliath.
You remember he was playing, I forget, one of the California teams, and he was a superstar. The only thing was he couldn't sink his free throws, so they had to pull him late in the fourth quarter because he was a liability. The guy's only 30 years old for a center. That's not old. This guy, if they find
He
a way
played like
to
it.
match
In the
him
first
with
half.
Vucevic,
The first half, he had like maybe 10, 9, 11 points or something, 18 rebounds. And also there were a lot of moments where he didn't get credit for the rebound, but he had his hands on the ball. And
I know.
and you would see him like make his presence in the lane, and people were just being thrown all over the place. Like he was, and so he was, I would say, the outlier in the first half. They stayed close enough. They didn't look like they're going to win the game.
No.
And but then they sort of started to wake up. And he said, this guy was with David Bojan and had been there the night before. He said, they just look exhausted. These are a lot of people that are not used to playing this many minutes because their other players are out. And Caruso was out. Anyways, they played well.
Lois, I'll talk to you later.
And it was very
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. Okay,
Very-
Rabbi, thank you.
All right,
Shabbat
be well.
shalom. Bye-bye.